Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Fox News has settled the defamation suit brought against them by Dominion Voting Systems. But the underlying problem, and it's a deep and profound one, is not going anywhere. And now Fox has to pay $787 million for a bind they got themselves into. It's a bind that the whole country is in a certain way. But what I'm talking about is the problem, which is that tens of millions of our fellow citizens live in such a constrained informational environment and are so distrusting of any alternative sources of information, they operate in what is basically an entirely separate informational sphere. I think the best way to understand this is just to look at some data, right? The spectrum of sources, for instance, that the median Republican primary voter consumes versus the median Democratic voter. So Democrats consume and trust a wide variety of sources. The New York Times, the Washington Post, this network, a broad spectrum of the mainstream media, the progressive media, across the board. The spectrum of what Republicans consume is way, way smaller. But first and foremost, they trust Fox News. That is their dominant source, along with just a few others like Talk Radio and OAN. It's a very, very small universe of ideologically partisan aligned sources of information. And here's the thing. That didn't happen by accident. That is the product of a successful effort by Fox News and others, a lot of other conservatives who have waged a decades-long war, going back to the 1960s, on the mainstream media and any other trusted American institutions. The late Rush Limbaugh enshrined the battle lines in what has become a famous or infamous monologue on what he called the four corners of deceit.
So we have now the four corners of deceit and the two universes in which we live, the universe of lies, the universe of reality, and the four corners of deceit: government, academia, science, and media. Those institutions are now corrupt and exist by virtue of deceit.
Government, academia, science, the media, corrupt, exist by virtue of deceit. This is what Limbaugh and the conservative movement taught people, hammered into their heads after day after day, month after month, year after year, that they, the Rush Limbaughs of the world, the Fox News of the world, are the sole source of reality. They exist in the universe of reality, and everyone else is in the universe of lies. And you can't trust anyone but them, the Rush Limbaughs and the Fox Newses. You can't trust the government officials or government statistics. You can't trust scholars. You can't trust scientists or the mainstream media reporters. And of course, knowledge, what we know about the world, is inescapably predicated on trust. We just can't verify firsthand the overwhelming majority of things we know about the world. I wasn't there for the randomized control trials for the vaccine, for instance, right? So what we do is we use trust as a means of coming to know about the world. For example, if a reporter for the New York Times says, I have seen this atrocity happening on the ground in Ukraine, and I've talked to folks that saw it, firsthand witnesses. They told me about it. I can't go check for myself, right? My disposition is to trust that it's true, and not completely, right? I would look for other verification, see if other outlets report similar findings as a kind of verification. We've seen that with atrocities and massacres that have happened in Ukraine. But trust is the foundation here. And those trust relationships with credible media sources, researchers, again, government, bureaucratic, statistical entities, they end up being the way that we form a lot of knowledge of the world. The American right has made it their mission to sever each of those trust relationships, to cut their base off from any other institution that produces knowledge. Now, this has created this incredibly dangerous situation, which conservatives really are severed from any connection, again, to the main institutions of knowledge production in our society. Think about it. Think of what the four corners of deceit: government, academia, science, and the media. Because they are severed from those institutions, these tens of millions of folks can then be sort of captured, dominated entirely by Fox News and its conservative allies. This is an incredibly lucrative thing. They've got customers who only come to them. Rush Limbaugh, who died a very, 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 very wealthy man, understood this. But here's the thing. Disconnecting their audience from other possible sources of authority has also left Fox vulnerable. they're vulnerable to someone else who's even more of a grandiose liar and even more effective demagogue coming along and winning over their audience's trust. And this is precisely what happened with the phenomenon of Donald Trump. Now remember, in the beginning, when he first got in the 2016 race, Fox and the Republican establishment wanted Trump out.
I'm really trying to understand how conservatives can look at Donald Trump's record, which he himself self-identifies more as a Democrat than as a conservative or a Republican, and say, that's our guy.
He's insulted and bullied his way to the top of the polls.
We saw an angry, defiant, fuming, threatening bully.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals.
I don't think I've ever heard such a stream of disconnected ideas since I quit psychiatry 30 years ago.
Of course, that didn't work. The base decided they trusted Trump more than they trusted Fox. And again, this is what's key here. Fox themselves have produced a situation in which they were helpless to do anything, right? They created an audience that was completely unwilling to believe anyone else who would say, yes, he's a sexist and a crook and he's dangerous. And we saw the same thing play out again after the 2020 election. Fox wanted to, in the main, institutionally, rely on their trust relationship with their audience and tell their viewers the basic truth that Joe Biden won the election. It wasn't rigged. And that what Donald Trump did was, as Rupert Murdoch actually wrote in an email, quote, pretty much a crime. I agree, Rupert. So Fox tried that for a couple of weeks after the election. The viewers started to turn away because they no longer trusted Fox. They trusted Donald Trump, who was telling them the election was stolen. Fox News CEO Suzanne Scott understood this. She laid it out plainly in another email made public, again, thanks to the Dominion lawsuit. Quote, we have damaged their trust and belief in us. Yes, it was basically a trust showdown, one that Fox couldn't win unless they adopted Trump's line, which they did. Because here's the thing. They couldn't go to their base and tell them, hey, look, don't just listen to us. Look at every other independent assessment of the election. Look at the official numbers provided by government. Look at the courts, another part of the government. Look at the reporting in the media, in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times and NPR and on and on and on. They couldn't do any of that because they are the ones who told their audience not to believe any of those people, because those people were, in Rush Limbaugh's words, the four corners of deceit. So Fox was left on its own, desperate to win back their audience, and so they decided to peddle Donald Trump's lies. And this is still a very much live issue because, listen to me here, the exact same problem is happening now, again, in the 2024 Republican primary. When Donald Trump attacks his likely opponent, Ron DeSantis, claiming, for example, that he is, for a Republican, an average governor who got 1.2 million less votes in Florida than me, DeSantis can't really hit back. So in that example, right, Trump fails to mention that he won Florida by less than 4 points. DeSantis swept the state with a margin of nearly 20 points. I mean, he only got fewer votes because it was a midterm, not a presidential. But again, who's going to say that? Who's going to inject that context? The Republican primary audience is so cut off from reality, those facts can't get through. And where can Ron DeSantis turn to appeal to? Like a Washington Post fact check? Not going to work. There's no referee. Fox News and the conservative movement destroyed the conditions for that. So now it's just a head-to-head battle of who you like more, who you believe, who you trust more. They trust Donald Trump. And until Rupert Murdoch and Suzanne Scott and the rest of the Republican Party and the political operatives, Ron DeSantis, the people working on his campaign, unless they figure out how to dismantle the situation they themselves built, Fox News and the rest of the right will always lose to Donald Trump or anyone else who can out-demagogue him.